I honestly don't know where to begin with this camera because there's so much to talk about, and you've seen in the intro there that you can get some pretty spectacular results. You've got a 360 build, you've got a 4K build, you can get a 1-inch sensor camera that goes on that for better low light performance, better picture quality. So full credit to Insta360 for coming out with a product that is not just a straight copy of a GoPro, tempting though that would be, and it combines the previous functionality of the Insta360 One X, a product that we absolutely loved, and kind of jams it in to this kind of modular pick and mix type approach. Very, very cool. It's very, very hard to say whether you need this. I mean, it entirely depends on what you already have. If you already own a GoPro and an Insta360 One X, for example, should you be buying this? Right, well, since this is a review and not an overview of all the functions, let me give you some conclusions because I've done the tests. In GoPro mode, I would say the picture quality is comparable to that of a GoPro 8. It's slightly different, but it's comparable. It's not better, it's not worse. So what we have here is the £300 option. We have a £300 GoPro. So this is now a direct competitor if you buy this camera in this configuration. If you own a GoPro 7 or 8, should you replace it with this? No, absolutely not. There's no reason to. They're basically the same now. Added to that, the GoPro is a very established product and it's reliable. Next up, we have the 360 configuration, the 360 build. Is this an improvement on the Insta360 One X? Picture quality tests that I've done, and picture quality matters very significantly to me. No, it's not. It's basically the same. So we have an Insta360 One X and we now have the Insta360 One R in 360 configuration. Quality is the same. And this little dual build comes in at £420. If you don't own an action camera or a 360 camera, this is probably a pretty great option because you're getting two cameras for the price of 1.5. I think that's a smart thing to do. I think that's a good thing. If on the other hand you already own cameras like this, then there's, in my opinion, no reason to upgrade. You can make a judgment on the practicality as to whether it's good to have it in one kind of unit where you can switch out like this, or whether it's nice just to have two separate cameras. I have mixed opinions on this because it is very practical and very easy to switch out, but at the same time, if you're up the top of a mountain, your hands are cold, you're switching these out and you drop one of them, that's a bit of a pain. There might be something to be said for just having the 360 camera in your pocket. Out it comes when you want to do a 360 shot. That's for you to decide. Next up, we have the so-called 1-inch build, which I don't have here, but we have the so-called 1-inch sensor camera that will get stuck on here, as you can imagine, and that should give us much better performance. If you think about the Mavic 2 Pro, for example, that has a 1-inch sensor camera co-developed with Hasselblad. Well, this one is co-developed with Leica, which is pretty cool. So the performance should be good. But then we're going up to £520 for that build, I think, which is not inexpensive, we can say. And that, then you're kind of thinking about, well, that's an expensive little camera, so should I be thinking about just some other more proper alternatives? It's very, very difficult to say because it completely depends on your own set of personal circumstances. What I can say though is it's a very exciting product, it's a very exciting concept. Full credit, as I say, to Insta360 for not just coming out with a straight copy of GoPro and for integrating their 360 functionality into this modular camera. They even have a system coming where you can put a 360 camera on top of the drone, a 360 camera under the drone, and then you can fly around and get rid of the drone completely from your shot. It's going to be very cool. We did a video with the 360 One X on top of the Mavic 2 Pro and got some fantastic results. So I'll be very excited to see what can be done with that functionality, courtesy of this modular system. It's a very exciting concept. It probably is the future. Is it right for you? Well, that's for you to decide. I do have a big list of positives written on the computer here, and I'll get to those in a second, I promise, but there's a couple other things I need to bring to your attention. When you're editing 360 footage, one of the most enjoyable ways of doing it is on a phone, because you can do it real time and you can hold down the record button and you can recompose the shots, and it's so much fun and you can get some great results. Well, you need a very good phone for that. And this isn't the first time that this issue of buying a $300, $400, $500 product comes up and then you find out that you need a $1,000 phone to actually use the app with it. The Mavic Mini has had the same issue. A lot of disappointed people bought a Mavic Mini only to find out their phone wasn't up to scratch, so be aware of that. Insta recommends an iPhone 8 at minimum, and in the documentation that we got with this pre-release, an iPhone 10 was recommended for doing the in-app editing of the 360 footage. Not all of us have $1,000 phones, people, and not all of us are interested in buying $1,000 phones. We just got an iPhone 11, because it's kind of our work, and I had an iPhone SE which was struggling. That's only a 3.5-year-old phone. So something I want to bring your attention to. Very important. What else is on this little list of grumbles? The workflow. 360 workflow is hard going at the best of times. You bring in the footage and you have to recompose and do all kinds of stuff, either on the desktop software or on the app. And big steps have been made here to improve that workflow. So I'm very impressed with the big steps forward on the 360 workflow. What I find a little bit strange, however, is that on the 4K workflow, you have to edit the software first in Insta's Studio app. The files come in as .insv, I think they are, I'll double check that, but they come in as this funny format. You can then export that as an MP4 and you set your bitrate and all that kind of stuff, and it does a great export, but it's an extra step in the process. GoPro, take the memory card out, stick it in your computer, edit straight away in Final Cut or whatever it is you're doing. And workflow is very important to me. Again, you're busy, you're doing lots of projects, you don't have time to faff around with stuff like that. So keep an eye out for that if that matters to you. Right, as you know, it is modular, so you can take it to pieces, and it is waterproof. That seems a little bit scary in itself because you're just pushing these bits together, and right here, the only electrical connection we have is the seal. The rest of this is just kind of mechanical clips. So we have this little seal under here that goes in here, and we've got a rubber seal around there. Time will tell if any of you manage to defeat the waterproof functionality of this camera, because it's quite a risk. You know, there's a lot of moving parts in here. I know from having it stuck to the side of the car and it got soaked, that when you take this apart, this is full of water in here. It does get full of water, so the water passes straight through here, so you're completely relying on this little rubber seal, which I'm sure does the job, but you need to look after your kit maybe a bit more than you might have to do with a GoPro. Probably my favourite thing about the modularity here is the ability to flip the screen around so that you can have it pointed the same direction as the camera itself, and that makes it ideal for a little vlogging setup. So there we have the screen and camera pointed in the right direction. Excellent, something that's not an option with a GoPro or your phone for that matter if you want to use the good cameras on the back side of the phone. As for microphones, you'll be able to get a USB-C to microphone adapter that comes out of here, and you can attach external microphones. And there's also the functionality to use Bluetooth microphones, so like AirPods for example, and hook them up. So that's pretty excited. Haven't been able to test that because it's not been activated in the firmware yet, but the idea of wireless microphone recording is pretty cool. So I think with this you've got a pretty nice vlogging setup. You've got flow state stabilization in here, so it's all nice and stabilized. Very light, very easy to use. No doubt picking up on some of the feedback for the Insta360 One X, we have this nice little rubber lens cap for the 360 camera to keep it safe. You don't want to be scratching that. We also have this cage here that the camera sits in, as you can imagine, and attached to that we can put on these lens guards, which are pretty great, because that's certainly been one of the issues with the Insta360 One X, is the ease with which you can damage the glass here on the lenses is easy. And if you do that, your camera is potentially ruined. So it's much easier to look after this setup. Like any camera with a tiny sensor, be it an action camera or a phone, you need lots of light to get the best possible picture quality. And all of these cameras perform well in full bright sunlight, well lit situations where the ISO on the camera is all the way down at 100, so we don't introduce any noise into the image. I did some tests in here to see the performance drop off as the lighting conditions deteriorated. And I'd say on the whole, they all do about the same. I mean, I was kind of hoping for a performance improvement on the 360 side of the R versus the One X. I haven't seen that. I'd say they're comparable, slightly different, but comparable. And similarly, on the action camera build, the picture quality is different, but similar in performance, I would say, to the GoPro Hero 8. I'm going to do more videos, more in-depth studies of this, but I'm just trying to give you some conclusions here backed up with a little bit of evidence. One thing I did enjoy about using the One R versus the One X or the GoPro is the ease with which you can use full manual control when setting in exposure in video mode. For me, this is just fundamental. I don't want to let the camera take over with auto exposure and auto ISO and all that kind of stuff, auto shutter. I just need full manual control. So get that ISO all the way down on 100. The aperture is fixed on the lenses, so we can't really touch that anyway, and then we just do with that shutter as we wish to get a decent exposure. That's the only variable that you're really changing to control exposure, and I like that it's just a basic, simple manual set of controls if you want it to be. By contrast with the GoPro, for example, you have this weird kind of minimum ISO, maximum ISO type approach, where if you want to make sure it sits on 100, you have to set it to minimum 100, maximum 100, and the whole thing's just a bit footery. On the Insta360 One X, you don't get full manual control of the ISO or the shutter for that matter either. So I like that. For me, that's a big step up. The One R has flow state stabilization, which does a fantastic job, as you've seen on the shots in the introduction. I think that's one thing where Insta360 excels. I mean, if you have used a One X, you can waggle this thing about and the footage is perfectly stabilized. It's quite amazing in the 360 mode. I haven't done side-by-side comparisons of the stabilization between the GoPro and the One R, but I think in the grand scheme of things, they're both absolutely phenomenal, and these cameras have reached a level of performance that couldn't have been imagined a couple of years ago. Personally, I don't think cameras are obliged to give you perfectly smooth stabilization if you're running around like this, and quite frankly, they almost do that. So for me, I'm very, very happy with all of them. In order to export the best quality footage from the Insta360 One R when it's in this action camera build, we import the footage into the Insta360 Studio, the desktop software, and we then export, putting the bitrate up to 100 or above, and then we also have the option of adding some grain reduction, which I found to be very, very important. The image is very noisy off this, and you definitely want to have that setting switched on. I've tested it quite extensively, and it does benefit tremendously, because without that, the image will be very noisy on ISO 200 or above. Now, in reality, you do not want to be going anywhere near 800 ISO or above on this camera, or any of these cameras for that matter. But with ISO 200, maximum 400, and you put that grain reduction on when you export, you'll get a pretty good image from this. If you want to get the best quality 360 footage, you also need to use the desktop application so you can get the bitrate up, get the resolution up to 4K. And this is where it gets a little bit confusing, because one of the best ways of editing the 360 footage is using your phone, as I've discussed, where you recompose your 360 footage during the editing, and it's a lot of fun using it with your phone, but your export options are limited there in terms of quality. So I find that mismatch a little bit odd. Maybe that will be resolved at some point in the future. That being said, Insta360 have given us a bunch of workflow improvements here for shooting with 360 footage. So we have point to track on this, so you can point the camera in the 360 build, click a little icon on the back of the screen there, and it will track the subject, and then when you bring that in, that saves you a lot of hassle putting keyframes and all that kind of stuff to track the subject. Very quickly, if you're not familiar with this whole 360 thing, it records everywhere. These lenses film in excess of 180 degrees. So it films the whole way around. And if you've got this camera on a selfie stick, like this, you can walk around with it and it gets rid of the selfie stick. It's very, very cool. I really do enjoy the creative opportunities brought by 360, and I think Insta360 have just done a fantastic job of integrating them into user-friendly cameras, and they also deserve a lot of credit for giving us the Insta360 Studio, the desktop software, which is, from what I can tell, the easiest and best way to edit 360 footage. There's too much functionality in the software to talk about in this video. It's a bit overwhelming, so I'm going to test it all in a different video, but we have HDR video, we have stop motion effects, we have point to track, which I've also mentioned, we have auto frame, so you can set it up in a way that it's always following you, or that it's always pointing forwards, or that it's always pointing backwards, or always pointing in the direction of the camera. I mean, there's a whole bunch of options, all of which I think will definitely improve productivity on the 360 side of things. So stay tuned for another video where I'm going to get into all of that in some more detail. We don't tend to associate action cameras with photography, but they do take photos, and they take very good photos in the case of the Insta360 One R. Very impressed with the raw photos, tons of dynamic range in there to play around with, tons of detail retained in the shadows and highlights. Also, you can take a 9-step HDR photo with this camera, all raw photos that you can composite later and get a spectacular result like I did of the car here. And play around to your heart's content with the colors because you have so much flexibility in post. Again, I'll get into all the modes like the night mode and all that kind of stuff at a later date. There's just been too much to test for this camera. But at the end of the day, the best camera is the one that you have on you at any point in time. So if you're only taking one camera with you, you know that you can get good photographic results with the Insta360 One R. Insta360 have made some quite significant improvements to the workflow using the app as well. The most significant for me is non-transfer editing. So in the past with the Insta360, you would need to transfer all the files to your phone and then you could edit on your phone, which was a problem for me because my phone at the time didn't have much storage and it was also very time consuming to get the files across. So I'd be doing one file at a time and then editing, then exporting chunks, deleting, and then bring the next one across. Now you can just use the communication between the camera and the phone and edit away to your heart's content, exporting as you wish. So that's a big improvement, I think. When we're filming in live view, we have a histogram, which is absolutely essential to getting the right exposure. When you're outside, you've got glare on your screen. You can't tell necessarily from that what your exposure should be. You don't want peaking highlights. Use the histogram. I also found the live view on the phone to be very responsive. So when the camera moves, your live view on the phone reacts very, very quickly. There's not much lag by comparison with the GoPro 8. There's quite a significant lag between the two. So it makes it a more user-friendly, enjoyable experience. Wrapping up, we have an exciting new camera where you get 2 cameras in a modular function for the price of 1.5. Are they better than these cameras? No, the performance is basically the same, but as I say, if you don't own any of these already, then you get 2 for the price of 1.5. That's quite cool. The app significantly improved, lots of new functionality, tons of new features on both these modes. Too many to cover here, and the performance is pretty good. If you do want to follow our journey, do stay in touch. Subscribe. We've got lots more information coming on the channel, lots of interesting videos already on the channel, so take a look at some of those as well, and we will see you next time.